welcome to Top of the Hops. I'm your host, Mike Riker, and joining me today is the host of the Kicking and Out at 2 podcast. The host is Dave Rosenbluth. Dave, thank you so much for joining us today.
Mike, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
So tell me a little bit about this podcast, Kicking Out at 2, man. I listened to a couple of episodes. I love the retro aspect of the podcast, but how'd you get involved with it? Tell us a little bit more about the podcast.
So, I'm not sure how many of your listeners and your viewers know, but you met me through Ken Reedy.
Yes.
And we used to do the Ken Reedy show for a little while. And I think it was like 2018 maybe. I had gotten onto the Bruce Pritchard Something to Wrestle podcast. I had started listening to those. And I was like, I was not a big listener of podcasts before that, even though I did one with Ken. And I started listening to those, and the retro aspect really fascinated me because every podcast out there was always talking about what was going on currently. And I just thought there was way too many of those out there. And I was like, it was right up my alley. I'm all about, retro, and I'm big, nostalgic with the wrestling. And so I started listening to a few of those, and then I kind of incorporated a little bit of that with Ken. And then, I'm not really sure for whatever reason, but I think Ken just kind of wanted to go in a different direction with the podcast. So then I decided to do my own thing. And it was kind of modeled after like the Conrad Thompson model. A lot of it was inspired by the retro and the nostalgia. So, I have a lot of fun doing them. I do them in my basement. I have my buddy Dennis will, come on, and we'll do watch alongs, and we've done topics before. My brother Justin, I used to have like in the beginning, like a rotating round table of like co-hosts to just kind of mix up, but I don't do it as often. I used to go weekly, and then I just decided to scale back a little bit for quality of life, and it's a labor of love. It's a hobby of mine.
It is, yeah.
So I
love the retro aspect of it. I love that you do the watch alongs or the listen alongs as well too. I love, I just listened to your last one. It's funny that, we'll have a little bit in the future about this match. You did just recently about the Kurt Angle versus Stone Cold Steve Austin from SummerSlam 01. Yes. And so it's a great, like you said, it's like the model of a Conrad Thompson podcast. And you're right. You mentioned it earlier, Dave. I was just like you. I didn't like podcasts either. It just felt boring to me. And like you said, a lot of it was about the current stuff. The only one I would listen to, obviously, was Busted Open, which I was a part of for a while. Yeah. But once Pritchard came on board, man, it kind of opened the floodgates for me as far as, listening to that, because, he told so many great stories, especially early on, about Dusty and about Piper and about Savage, that I just got me hooked. And then, of course, now, I kind of grew with Shivani and Bischoff. And now I listen to basically all of them. So it's funny you said that, because I was in the same boat. I wasn't in podcasts either. But once Pritchard got on board, I was all in.
Yeah. Yeah, that's funny. I used to listen to Shivani a lot. I loved Shivani. And then I used to listen to, I still listen to Bischoff. I really like Bischoff's podcast. I listened to Jarrett for a while, Arn Anderson for a while. Everybody that was under that Conrad umbrella, I listened to. And there were so many podcasts throughout the course of the day that it was like, I can't even keep up anymore. So
I know I'm way behind on a lot of stuff, but I still enjoy every once in a while. If I see a topic I like, I'll definitely put it on.
Yeah, that's how I am too. I don't follow religiously, but if there's a certain match or whatever they cover, like I think Shivani's doing a watch along of Bash at the Beach '98, Hogan and DDP and Malone. So I might check that one out. That just because I dig Shivani. I should probably go back to listen to his stuff, because I hear it's gotten better.
Yeah, it's his podcast is funny because they'll watch do a watch long, and for like a half hour they're not even paying attention to the match, they talk about other stuff, or joking on each other, which I like. I like a little levity to it. So it's not all about the wrestling sometimes with those two, but I'm fine with it, because Shivani at times can be very hilarious.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Actually, it's funny because when I used to listen to him early on, I bought a shirt from him on Pro Wrestling Tees, and they did a promo where, like, you buy a shirt, you get a phone call. So he called me one night, and it was funny. I was in bed and I was falling asleep. It was pretty late too. It was probably like 9:30 or so at night, and my wife's like, "Your phone's ringing from an unknown number," and I was like, "I never did that," and I picked it up, and he was like, "Dave, Tony Schiavone here," and it like book, and for like 5 minutes we talked about, because I live in Connecticut, UConn basketball. He's a big
Oh
college,
wow.
so yeah, it was kind of cool. Definitely couldn't go back to sleep after that, but
No, no, I'm sure you're probably jazzed up about that. So what was your first thought of wrestling? Like when did you start following wrestling? Was it at a young age? Was it a little later in
yeah,
life?
yeah. My earliest memory of wrestling was probably the first memory I have was watching WrestleMania 2 in my grandparents' living room. I don't know if it was live or if it was a video cassette from the store,
Right.
but that's my first earliest memory of watching wrestling. And then WrestleMania 3, I went and saw that at the time closed circuit movie theater. There was no pay-per-view.
Yes,
My
that's
father
right.
took movie theater to see it, and I think tickets were like $4 a piece, so it was like $8 to go watch WrestleMania in the movie theater. I was 4 at the time when that happened. So yeah, those are my earliest memories, like 86, 87, that time frame. Hogan being a big inspiration for me,
Yeah,
getting
me
to
too.
it. Randy Savage, Roddy Piper, that rock and wrestling era is what really kicked it off for me. And then I don't exactly remember the year, but it might have been not long after that. I want to say like 80, yeah, maybe it was 87 or so. One day I remember as a kid, my parents were flipping through the channel after I'd got done watching Wrestling Challenge. Then it was NWA Wrestling, Jim Crockett Promotions, and the
Yeah,
first I ever saw was Rock and Roll Express against the Midnight Express. So
that's a good
then
introductory.
yeah, I was lucky. My parents kind of stumbled on that, and then my wrestling schedule on Saturdays was pretty booked between that and then NWA, and then there was even a Saturday night show. So yeah, it was I was 24/7 wrestling, even for so long, for a while that like my parents had to cut me off at one point, and like, limit it because it was just getting out of hand.
Right. Was there ever a span that you didn't follow wrestling at all?
No, there wasn't.
Okay.
I tabs on pretty much everything. Um, I grew up in a house. I got 3 younger brothers, so the 4 of us, 2 of us shared a bedroom apiece, and usually my parents didn't allow TVs in our room, so
Hmm.
we had bedtime. So a lot of the old primetime wrestlings I didn't get a chance to watch at night. The old early Monday night Raws because I had a bedtime. I
Right.
couldn't past 8 or 9 o'clock at night, so I would keep tabs with a lot of the weekend shows. That
Okay.
was my fix. Superstars on Saturday morning, WCW Saturday night, uh, WCW Pro, the shows like that. So the weekends was when I got my fix. And then it was like a rare occurrence that my parents would allow me to order a pay-per-view, unless something major that I really wanted to see. And then I'd have to sell them on, well, Ma, I didn't order a pay-per-view for over a year. And then they'd be like, all right, I guess you can get this.
That's
So
cool. Yeah, I'm the
yeah.
same way. Like I never, even like during some of the down times, like in like 93 or 95, I still wasn't into wrestling. I might have been as enthused as I was, say back in 86, 87, but I still loved it. Like to me, it's like wrestling's like pizza. There's no such thing as bad pizza. And that's to me what wrestling too. It's like there's no such thing as bad wrestling. Yeah, it's bad, but it still entertains me.
Yes. Yes.
So
Great way of looking at it. Now that I'm older and I don't have a bedtime, obviously. I got a little more access to things, especially with Peacock and YouTube and Google. There's things that it fascinates me when I go back and search things that I never knew existed, and that was because I didn't get a chance to watch them back then. Like
right.
um, there was recently, what did I find? And we'll talk about it with the Summerslam, but there was an angle with Ronnie Garvin on WWF programming where Valentine and Jimmy Hart got him fired as a wrestler, but then he became a referee and a ring announcer. And
Yes.
I didn't know anything about that until I just kind of I was tooling around on Twitter one day, and there's a group called they have a podcast. They do Golden Era WWF, but it's Our Vantage Point, I think it's,
Okay.
and they show a lot of WWF clips, stuff I'd never even seen before. That was pretty freaking cool. So they're a good follow on, or I'm sorry, X it's called, not Twitter. I forgot.
Yeah, I know. I still get confused with some of that. So,
Yeah.
okay, before we get to our top five, this is called Top of the Hops. What are you drinking today?
I am drinking an A&W Zero Sugar root beer.
Okay, I love root
Yeah,
beer.
yeah,
So, are you a root beer guy?
yeah, I do like root beer. I've liked soda more in the last 10 years since I quit drinking.
Okay,
So, soda's like my vice.
right.
Although I scaled back a little bit, I do like the zero sugar stuff, or the zero sugar Dr. Pepper, things like that. So Dr. Pepper, root beer, and like a Sprite. Usually when I go out to eat, it's like a water and a Sprite for me.
Does that root beer have like the same kind of taste as a regular root beer?
It's slightly different.
Okay.
I can't really tell how, but it's slightly different. I don't know.
Does it have like a bad aftertaste, or it's not terrible?
No, it's not terrible. No,
Okay. Okay,
no.
cool. Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, sodas for me, I quit soda, God, back in my 20s because soda would affect my stomach so bad that I just couldn't do it anymore. And I love root beer. I love Dr. Pepper. Those are my two favorites. But and every once in a while, even today, I'll see if I see a root beer Dr. Pepper, I'm like, let me have a little swig of that, a little taste of it. But if I have like a whole can or like a whole glass of that, it'll affect me for the rest of the day. So I try to stay away from it. The only soda I really drink is ginger ale because it
Okay.
kind of does soothe my stomach a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
But what I do have today is a root beer, just a different type of root beer. It's called Not Your Father's
Hmm.
Hard Root Beer. And it's supposed to, I've had this before. It's supposed to smell like root beer, it's supposed to taste like root beer, and it does. And it comes out, the color is very similar, very amber,
Oh
as you
wow.
see it there. Yeah. And it's like you see the carbonation's the same.
Yeah.
Um, it, it, it's very, it's very sweet. It's very syrupy. But it smelled like a root beer, and it's got a little bit of aftertaste. I will say that. That's the only negative I would say about that. Um, it comes off a little flat, but as far as the actual taste of root beer, this nails it. You know what it kind of reminds me of? I don't know if you remember as a kid. It kind of reminds me of the root beer barrels candy that
Yeah.
I used to get. Yeah, so it's got kind of like that similar taste to it.
Okay.
I like you don't taste any alcohol at all in this, which is dangerous. But
Yeah.
with something like this, though, like even like the soda, I can only have one of these and I'm done. Like I just like it will affect my stomach so much. But
Yeah.
here's to you, Dave. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank
I
you, Mike.
appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's funny. I quit drinking 10 years ago, and then in the last, I don't know, I can't even keep track, but now there's all these different kinds of, you have the hard seltzers and the hard,
Yes.
that stuff wasn't around when I was
No.
when I quit
We were
drinking.
drinking wine coolers, Dave, right?
Yeah, yeah. Mine was like hard lemonade. Yeah, now
Right.
now it's different, the Trulies and all the different hard seltzers and out there, and the ciders and things like that. They didn't
Yeah.
have that stuff when I was drinking, and then towards the end when I quit. It's funny. Towards the end when I quit drinking, when things got really bad, I used to drink 3 olive root beer vodka.
Oh, I do like that. Yeah.
And like you said, you couldn't even taste alcohol in it, which was the worst. So
Right.
if I had 2 or 3 of those, forget about it. I was on, it knocked me over. It was not a
Yeah,
good.
I've gotten away from all the hard liquors. I haven't had really a vodka in a while, a long time. I only drink beer every once in a while. I don't drink during the week. I only drink during the weekends. I
Hmm.
have like two or three. I just like I said, I'm into the craft beers and going to breweries and kind of like I've been enjoying the process of how a beer comes about. Uh, but uh, but this one is nice. It's not bad. Like I said if I get my root beer fix, if I'm in the mood for root beer, this is not a bad option other than in the actual, A&W or Barks root beer, All right,
Nice.
so you're before we get to that, we have to talk about what's behind you. You got some great stuff behind you. Tell my viewers, man, what you got going on? I see a lot of action figures, some great
Yeah,
pictures up on the wall.
I'm a,
Yeah,
I'm a
take
big.
us through it.
So when I decided to do my podcast, um, I had this vision in my head about like when I'm doing the show, like the room I'm in, the environment has to embody what I used to live through as a kid watching wrestling. So I wanted like what I grew up with around me to be surrounded by it. Pictures, action figures, things like that. So I'll give you a little bit of a tour here. This is um this is a shelf from an action figure group that I belong to. These are the LJN toys here. I used to have a lot of these when I was a kid, but this shelf here, it was made by some guy. I forget the guy's name. I purchased it off of him. He custom made this. So
Wow,
you
that's
like
incredible.
these ropes here, going down the line, and then up top here I got some pictures: Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart. I got a very rare autographed Randy Savage picture, which is hard to find.
Oh wow, that's amazing.
Local shop. Um, my logo with Bruce Pritchard, Conrad, and Eric Bischoff sticking out at two. I actually have my wife got this for me one year for our anniversary, the WrestleFest decal from the WrestleFest arcade game.
Oh, oh my God. We should do one on
Yeah.
top 5 wrestling video games because that might be number one.
Yeah. So like I had said, part of what I wanted down here, because the basement's finished, but I don't want to totally take up too much of it.
Right.
It could be, something where my wife and I can entertain guests, but it's taken up a decent portion of it with all the action figures I have. I have a lot of the Hasbros and the Mattels, the Elites, and some of the Funko Pops. I even got some of the old WCW Galoob action figures. So I wanted that arcade down here. I had looked for it on eBay. I just wanted to get a ballpark figure of what it could be, and it was like $1,000 or something like that.
Oof,
for what I
yeah.
saw on eBay. But I didn't want to take my chance on something so old, and then this thing gets shipped here and it doesn't even work.
Right. Right.
Nowadays, there's those like mini arcades that they have set up, and they have refurbished games in them, and so hopefully one day somebody comes out with like an old WrestleFest, like a top kind of arcade, and then maybe I'll spring for that and put that down here because I definitely have a little bit of room where I can squeeze that in. But yeah, I just wanted the setup to be. I wanted to be surrounded by my childhood and the good things about what I liked as a wrestling fan growing up, and that was kind of like what was the driving force behind doing my podcast. And then now it's become, so I mean, my wife, she's not too thrilled with it, but I mean, my action figure collection can get a little out of hand. I tell her, I was like, it could be a lot worse. I could either go back to drinking, which you were never around for that and you don't want to be,
Right.
or be a drug addict, or I could, go spend my money at a titty bar. Excuse my language. Do something like that. I go, this here, it's right here. It's in front of you. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
And she's gotten better with it over time. She's definitely got over time. So
is the LG the main one? Is that the most sought after ones? Are those?
The LJNs and the Hasbros are pretty sought after, depending on which ones and the years that they came out. So for instance, the Hasbro figures, the small ones that used to have like the arms and the legs.
Okay.
Moving. So I learned this. I learned this as I started collecting. They have what they call the green card series for the Hasbros, and those are the most sought out ones. So those are 1-2-3 Kid, Evil Crush, Ludwig Borga, Yokozuna, Atom Bomb, and the Smoking Guns.
Okay, so 1993.
1993. That was the last series that Hasbro made out of those figures, and those are the most sought out ones.
Interesting.
They call those, if you get them, they call them mint on card, meaning they're in the original packaging. And if they're like mint, there's no creases. If the bubble's clear, if there's no discoloration, those could go for some big money, especially from that series.
Yeah.
So I've seen on eBay 1-2-3 Kid go for almost $2,000 in the pack, and then maybe 1,000 to in between a 500 to 1,000 out of the package, but in mint condition.
Wow.
So those are what the figure collectors call the holy grails.
Yeah.
Of the Hasbros.
Interesting. Wow. You wouldn't think those guys, especially that time period, would be like you said, the holy grail. You wouldn't think, like you said, Evil Crush or 1-2-3 Kid would be involved in that. You'd think it'd be something like Hogan or Savage, but it's interesting that it's wrestlers like that.
Hogan and Savage are pretty the most easy ones to find, even in the Hasbro.
Yeah.
So if you ever wanted to kind of get an idea of what the action figure collector world is like, you ought to check out, I don't know if you have, but the Major Figures podcast with Matt Cardona.
I've heard a couple of those episodes. Yes.
They did a 2-hour YouTube tutorial on the history of the Hasbro action figure, their own collections.
Right.
And Cardona is he's an action figure lunatic. Like, he's probably got a whole house that's just filled with them. Between out of the box, in the box, there's protective cases for the ones in the box. He's even got like prototypes that weren't even made. So, like, for instance, that green card series for Hasbro in '93, that was the last series. Hasbro was in the early process of doing an orange card series that was going to feature USA Lex Luger, Jeff Jarrett, Men on a Mission, Diesel, Bastion Booger, and like I forget some, and another Doink. And he's got a prototype of a Lex Luger that had been made in the factory, but they had mass produced it because Hasbro lost the license with WWF at the time.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, that's crazy. My son used to have the wrestling figures when he was in the wrestling, and then he got rid of them, which I probably shouldn't have done, but he gave them to a friend of his. I do have three that Impact gave me when I worked for Busted Open. They're still in the package, and I have them hanging up in my son's room. There's Sting, Samoa Joe, Jeff Hardy, all three signed by each one.
Oh, nice.
So I have never looked, and I haven't seen if they're worth anything or anything like that. Because my son could care less about wrestling anymore. He's now into NBA and pro football, so wrestling has gone by the wayside with him. But I like to see how much those are worth because, like I said, they're signed by those guys and they're still in the box.
I'm sure if you were to entertain it, you could get it. You make a decent fit. Some of those real diehard figure collectors that will collect figures with just signatures would probably give you a decent price. There's all different kinds of variables that you have to think about too. Like I said, is the card, they call it a card, is the card mint, or has the toy been graded? Which like there's grading of toys, which I don't do any of that stuff. I'm a collector. I take them out of the box. I like to hold them every once in a while. I have a laundry room down here. I'll do the laundry and then I'll come look at my toys and pull them out for a few. And then my wife will say to me, "What took you so long? You just had to put the laundry away." "Oh, you were." I'm like, "Yeah, I was." She was like, "Did you say good men?" That's what she calls them. She calls them your men, Dave. So,
well, that's amazing. So today our topic, obviously, we're wrestling. SummerSlam just went by the wayside a couple weeks ago. We're doing our favorite top 5 SummerSlam cards. Dave, we'll start with you at number 5, then we'll come back to me, so on and so forth. So, Dave, what's your number 5 SummerSlam card?
My number 5 comes from the year 2005, SummerSlam 2005, headlined by Hulk Hogan and Shawn Michaels. A lot of people look at 2005 in WWE, and there's some bright spots, but for the most part, a lot of people look at it and they don't really look. They don't see 2005 WWE, like they don't look at it very, in endearing terms. And I thought this SummerSlam was a good card, top to bottom. Hogan and Michaels headline. You had John Cena, who was just really coming up, against Jericho, Batista, and JBL for the world title. Even though the gimmick was stupid, the custody of Dominic ladder match.
Oh, that's a great one, though. I agree. That's an underrated match.
The match is great. The story to get shit, but the match is great. Even the Edge Matt Hardy match, stemming from their real life personal issues that they had that transcended into TV. Undertaker and Randy Orton. I mean, overall, it was just a fantastic. It was literally because that year they did the draft. They drafted guys like one per week, so they had the draft last like all month long. So they were revealing draft picks on each show, and it was kind of like the all-star game of the best of what WWE had to offer in 2005 at that time. So I really enjoyed that show, top to bottom. I think it's a pretty fun card.
Yeah, you're right. It's funny you mentioned that card because there's some things that triggered my memory. And you're right about that Edge Matt Hardy match. That match, I remember watching it for the first time when I first watched it. Like, oh my God, they're really beating the shit out of each other. Like, I think this is real. And I think they stopped. Did they stop the match because Matt Hardy was bleeding, or excessive blood or something?
I remember watching it and I was like, I wanted a little more out of it because there was that real life element to it. But looking back on it, when you watch, I was like, it was so personal. He bled. They stopped the match. I was like, that's the way it should have went. At least the first round,
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Like I said, that match definitely stands out. The Hogan Michaels match is interesting. A lot of course, talk about this. You either love it or you hate it. So you were okay with the overselling by Shawn in that match?
I didn't have a problem with it. And the only reason I had a problem with it was because Well, a couple of reasons. One, Shawn and Hogan were my. If there's a Mount Rushmore of my favorite wrestlers, Hogan and Shawn are on them with
Okay.
Randy Savage. So I never thought in my wildest dreams in 2005 I was going to see Hulk Hogan and Shawn Michaels. Like that was cool. Just they didn't have to ring the bell. If they just stood there, I'd have been fine with it. Like me personally, but I didn't have a problem with the overselling. And then if you look back on it, if you watch some of Hogan's old matches with Mr. Perfect, Hennig used to bounce around just as much as Shawn.
Great point, Dave. Great point.
So
Yeah.
it didn't really get. I mean, the backstory behind it was interesting, and that they had trouble working with each other. And I guess allegedly there was supposed to be a second match that they had agreed to, but Hogan put a stop to that because of something that was said in a promo. And so overall I didn't have a problem with it whatsoever. It was if anything, I mean, it's one of the reasons why we're talking about it today.
Yeah, no,
So
you're right. And like I said, I didn't know the backstory when you're watching the match. When you watch the match, it's Shawn puts on a great show. I love like you said, the stuff leading into it. The Shawn Michaels dressing up as Hulk Hogan on Larry King.
yes,
Which was listen, I'm a Hogan guy. I was rooting for Hogan, but even that made me laugh out loud. I mean,
that was think of them. See the argument that was made between the two of them, and it's been public that Hogan or Shawn thought it was going to be babyface versus babyface, and the story that Shawn kind of had depicted was that he wanted to see if he could beat the immortal Hulk Hogan, and then Hogan kind of switched gears and was like, "Well, I think it would be better if we did you as the heel and me as the babyface," and Shawn had kind of said to him, "Well, do you really want to do that? Because you don't want to see, the kind of heel that I am. I'll tear you up." And that was the big point of contention between the two of them. Now, did you like the buildup with Shawn as the heel, or do you think
I
babyface?
did. I did. It was just but it was like, even after the match, I think he shook his hand and said, "I just
Yeah,
had to find out,"
yep,
right? And it was like he's back to being a babyface again. So it was like so short lived. You guys talked about on your podcast about kind of like face turns that didn't work, or heel turns that didn't work,
yep.
and that I don't know if that didn't work or not, but just like maybe if that match it did. But look, Shawn at that time to me, Dave was not a heel. I thought he did a great job leading into that match. But after that Hogan stuff, he had to turn back face.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. I think he was a little more edgier,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it was hard because he had built such a following and gained such a reputation with the audience that it was hard for them to boo him.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. This wasn't '98 Michaels. This was a different Shawn Michaels.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Okay, so my number five goes back to 1992. It's obviously the SummerSlam at Wembley Stadium. I just love the pageantry of this SummerSlam. I love when the Road Warrior or Legion of Doom right out with their motorcycles. I could have
Yep.
done it without. I could have done it without Rocco on the motorcycle, but that's another story for another day. But listen, back then, all the big shows in stadiums were WrestleMania. This was kind of like the first one that I remember that was, oh my God, 80,000 at a SummerSlam was a big deal, especially, outside the United States as well. Um, Listen, some of the cards not great. I get it. To me, though, it's my favorite SummerSlam match ever between Brett and British Bulldog to main event that card. I love the build up to it with Diana Hart getting in the middle. But that match to me technically is one of the best matches ever. I like these. I love the Savage Warrior match as well. The only thing I could say is I wish Ric Flair was on the card instead of just being part of the storyline. But if you watch that match between Savage and Warrior, I know their WrestleMania 7 match is great. I thought they had great chemistry throughout, and this
Mhm.
match is underrated. It's got kind of a quirky finish with being like a double disqualification, double count out, whatever it was, because Mr. Perfect got involved, and you didn't know which corner he was going to be in. It was going to be in Warrior's corner, it was going to be in Savage's corner, and he's tripping both guys. It was a weird kind of thing, but they had great. I thought a very good match. I even thought that the Legion of Doom match against Money Inc. was good to start off the card. But to me, like I said, to me it was more about the pageantry and about that last match that makes it my number five.
That's interesting because I think it's funny when I was doing some research about these SummerSlams. Um, I was curious if you were going to include that into your list because it it doesn't make my list because I thought, I mean, there's two bright spots. Well, I shouldn't say two bright spots, but there's a lot of like clunkers on the card.
There is, yes.
And I do remember um, growing up watching the build up towards that SummerSlam. It kind of seemed like there were several matches they were going in certain directions, and then one week all of a sudden like it changed, and no rhyme or reason. Like one week Ultimate Warrior got cursed by Papa Shango and was throwing up, but then the next week they announced he's going to get a title match against Randy Savage.
Right.
And one week Bret Hart is in a rivalry with Shawn Michaels, and it seems like Shawn Michaels is kind of gunning for Bret, but then all of a sudden they go the family route.
Yeah.
Like it just seemed like they didn't tie up loose ends, and it just kind of felt weird. Like the Natural Disasters had beef with Money Incorporated for a while, but then they moved on to the Beverly Brothers, and the Beverly Brothers had issues with the Road Warriors, and it was just like it was kind of like they flip flopped a lot of the matches.
Yeah.
So
no, you're right. 92 is a weird year. Hogan had just left.
Yep.
So it's a big transition for WWF at the time. But like I said, to me that last match is to me the greatest match in SummerSlam history.
Oh,
so I had listen. You're right. I mean, Nails versus Virgil. I mean, terrible.
Man.
Yeah. Exactly.
Although I did like the Shawn Michaels Rick Martel.
I was just gonna say that, Dave. It's a weird stipulation.
Face like that was pretty.
And I thought Sherry was great in that match. The way she fainted and the way they carried her. So that you're right. That was a lot of fun. But like I said, I just love the pageantry of it too. Like I said, it felt like a WrestleMania at the time. So that's why that's my number 5. But there are probably, as far as cards, probably stronger cards. But to me, I have this little sentimental feel to this one.
Oh, I get that. I totally get that. I mean, I still watch. I watched that SummerSlam recently, actually, and the Bret Bulldog match, like it'll stand the test of time. The Savage Warrior match, like you said, they got great chemistry. I'm a big fan of the WrestleMania 7 match. I wasn't a fan of the story with the whole Mr. Perfect thing, and even as a kid at like 9 years old, I'm like, Mr. Perfect months ago with Ric Flair humiliated Randy Savage with the magazine with Miss Elizabeth in it. Why would Macho Man want to have him in his corner?
Right.
Like that was where my brain was in 1992 at the time. So it's funny how my brain worked at that time, because I was conditioned, good guys and bad guys and stuff like that.
Yeah.
At that time they kind of took a little turn and with it. So, pageantry massive when you watch it. All those
it
people,
is.
It really is. So I get why you put it on your list.
Okay, so number 4, what we got at number 4?
Number 4 for me would be SummerSlam 1990, Philadelphia. It was the double main event: Hogan and Earthquake, and then Warrior and Rick Rude. This one's sentimental for me because I was a big Hogan fan, as you know, and you'll hear that more as I talk about these SummerSlams. But I was like, that was the first time when they did the injury angle with Earthquake where I was like upset. Like I thought like my world was going to end if he didn't come back. And so much to the point that my grandfather used to take me to see the shows, and he took me to see a show like I think like a month before SummerSlam, or maybe 2 months locally. It was a house show, and it was like dubbed like the Get Well Hulk Hogan Tour. And it was headlined by Earthquake and Dino Bravo against Jim Duggan and Tugboat. And I remember they had the campaign on TV where you could write Hogan a letter and Tugboat would read them. And then, which I found out later, and I'm sure you know from listening to Bruce Pritchard, it was to start a mailing address or a mailing list for the catalog. So that was So I got a Hulk Hogan friendship bracelet, and I wrote him a letter. I watched wrestling every weekend in hopes that Tugboat was going to read my letter. He never did. Glad his fat ass went through the wall in WCW as a shock. My letter. But that to me, like that SummerSlam, and I didn't watch it live. A friend of mine had it. I watched the tape, I think like 2 days later. But there's a lot. It's just a fun show. The Rockers Power Glory open up, and you
Oh,
kind of the early stages of maybe the Rocker split.
yes.
Sapphire joins Ted DiBiase in the middle of the Dusty Rhodes Randy Savage match. Texas Tornado upsets Mr. Perfect for the Intercontinental title. The classic 2 out of 3 falls with the Hart Foundation and Demolition. And then, of course, you have the double main events.
Yep.
Overall, it's a really, really fun show. I don't think it gets enough credit for how good it is.
Yeah, it's funny. That just missed my top 5. That was my number 6. But you're right. That show is very underrated. I like, people forget how, like you said, that Hart Foundation Demolition match. It's funny. Like you look at the tag matches from SummerSlams from '88 to like '90. Those 3 in a row. You had, Hart Foundation Demolition '88. You had '89. You had Brainbusters and Hart Foundation. Then you go
Oh,
Hart Foundation Demolition. You had 3 SummerSlams in a row where there's just absolutely great tag team matches in each
yeah.
SummerSlam. And you're right. That's where 3 Falls is tremendous. And that's the one with Crush, correct?
Yes, Crush.
Oh,
So Crush the alternate, and then they tried to do the switcheroo. Axe hit under the
right.
ring. Legion of
Yeah.
Doom showed up. They pulled him out. That sets up the finish, and then the Hart Foundation won in the 3rd fall.
Yeah, and people talk about. I just mentioned Ultimate Warrior in my last one. Another again underrated match. Again, another guy he had great chemistry with. I thought was Ravishing Rick Rude.
Yes.
The WrestleMania 5 match. The SummerSlam the year before, and this cage match was really good. I remember my brain keeps going to that time where Warrior's climbing down the cage and he does the Ravishing Rick Rude like hip
Yeah.
swerve and then
Yeah.
drops down, which was awesome. And
Yeah.
I think that was Rude's kind of what was that his last match with the WWE
It,
or his last big match?
that was his last pay-per-view match. He was actually they had started a program with him and the Big Boss Man. They were kind of continuing Bobby Heenan's little crusade
Right.
against the Boss Man, and then I think Rude either had a contract, either was up for a contract and there was a contract dispute, or he had just quit. I don't remember all the details, but he was actually advertised to be on the Earthquakes team for Survivor Series.
Okay.
And he didn't make the cut because he either quit or I forget
Right.
they were positioning him on that team to oppose Boss Man because him and Boss Man were going to start something up.
Yeah. No, you're right. Like I said, that just missed. I almost put it in my top 5. That's a really good WrestleMania. I think out of the early WrestleManias, that's the best one of the 3. My number 4 is the SummerSlam from 2000. I actually love this SummerSlam. It's got the triple threat match, that main event, and of course Kurt Angle suffers that horrible concussion in the middle of the match. He tells a great story on his podcast about how he got through that match. That was all about Triple H and Stephanie kind of talking him through it.
Yep.
But that match is great. You have the 2 out of 3 falls between Benoit and Jericho, which is an absolute classic, great match between those two. You have listen, it's not a great match, but I think of Shane McMahon falling from how many feet in the match against
Yep.
Blackman. You got the Jerry Lawler fighting Taz, where
That's
Ross
a
gets
fun.
up from hits Taz over the head with the candy jar, which is also great. So yeah, that to me is one of the better SummerSlams. I like that one. 2000 WWE is clicking on all cylinders. You can see that they're about to take over. They're killing WCW in the ratings.
Oh yeah.
And so their WrestleMania, and obviously I'm missing the big one. Obviously, is the first ever TLC match.
Ask
Which
me. You ran down the whole card except for that one.
yeah, it's amazing. So it's that match gets overlooked, like the way I just overlooked it. But people talk about TLC 2 at WrestleMania, but this was the first one, and
Yeah.
it doesn't get talked about at all. They always go back, to TLC 2 because it happened at WrestleMania, not at SummerSlam.
Yeah.
But if you guys have not watched the first TLC, I implore you to go back and watch that first one, because that first one to me is better than the Triangle Ladder match at
Yes.
WrestleMania 2000. This one is fantastic. They did take it to another level at WrestleMania 17, but this one was a great, great ladder match.
Oh yeah. I mean that's another fun show. That I thought about putting that on my list. There is 2000 WWF was cooking, man.
God, yeah.
They
And no Austin during that time either, which is crazy.
Yeah, and that's the surprising thing too. Like when he got hurt, like months prior, I thought to myself, like, how are they going to hold it together? I'm not saying that like the ship was going to go down, but I just thought to myself, like, it just might not be the same. And
Right.
in fact, it was even better. Like, imagine what that year would have been like if he had been healthy, with all those other with Kurt Angle and the rise of AAA. I mean, just imagine like what kind of content they could have produced with a healthy Steve Austin during that era.
Yeah, I think that's where Triple H doesn't get enough credit. I thought his 2000 was one of the best heel runs ever.
That put him
Yeah,
that that
absolutely.
that put him on the map. I mean, people were noticing him, but that was like the biggest opportunity for him. He's like, Austin's gone. Now it's my time to kind of slide in. Undertaker was there for half the year too.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, that's
So
right.
two of the biggest names, and he stepped up tremendously. And that year belongs to him, in my opinion.
Yeah, and you're right about like other people had to step up. So like we just talked about, Edge and Christian, Dudley Boys, Hardys, they all stepped up and
Yeah.
had these amazing matches. Even going back to late '99 when Edge and Christian had that great match. I think it was No Mercy in Cleveland against the Hardys. That's kind of what put those two teams on the map. And of course,
Yep.
you bring the Dudleys on, and then next thing you know, they're flying. So yeah. All right. So number 3, what we have, Dave?
Number 3 for me goes to 1991 SummerSlam from Madison Square Garden. This was one of those times where I was allowed to order the pay-per-view. And I had a friend over, and the big deal for me was Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth getting married. I was a big Savage fan. Miss Elizabeth was my first like television crush I ever had as a kid. And then just even the other match, like Hogan and Warrior teaming up against the Triangle of Terror with Sid as the referee, and the elements of where's Sid stand? Is he with the Triangle of Terror? Hogan and Warrior, they have a history. Are they gonna explode? The jailhouse match, Big Boss Man and the Mountie with the
A lot
vignettes,
of fun. Yeah.
classic stuff. Virgil winning the $1 million title. Everything on that card, with the exception of Valentine and IRS and the opening 6-man tag, everything had a story behind it, and it was all blown off at that SummerSlam. Legion of Doom beat the Nasty Boys to win the tag titles.
Right.
Bret Hart defeated Mr. Perfect, and he, elevated his status to a singles, on a singles level. I mean, it's another SummerSlam that, I mean, people, when they think of that SummerSlam, they think of Bret and Perfect. I feel like, at least with a lot of fans,
They do.
but
Yeah.
so much other good stuff on the card, and the commentary, Piper, Gorilla, Bobby Heenan, just nonstop entertainment. If I closed my eyes and just kept the audio on with the three of them on, I think I still would have been entertained, not watching them, listening to them.
Yeah, that's a good one, Dave. And you're right. I think people, I think about that SummerSlam. I think of Bret and Perfect and the wedding. I don't even think about the tag match with Hogan, because and then years later you hear about the backstory about what happened during that time. So but you're right, and I forgot about this, and now it's starting to roll in my memory a little bit. And even when I did research, I didn't hit me until you started talking about it. That Boss Man Mountie match, it's not even about the match. It's about the aftermath, where they
Yes.
actually have to, they're cuffing the Mountie and they take him to New York City jail, and they go back every so often to where he
Yep.
is, where they fingerprint him, and then they try to take a picture of him, and he is great during that whole thing. So you're right. I totally forgot about that. That was a lot of fun, and you're right. That, and of course, having it at the Garden always makes it special.
Yep.
I always thought though that the wedding went off without a hitch. Now something happened obviously afterwards with Jake during the after of the wedding. But I always thought someone was going to interfere in that wedding. I thought it was going to happen right then and there, but it went off without a hitch, and I was kind of a little surprised about that.
I was actually kind of, when I was a kid, I was happy that they got married. I didn't have that thought, but I was kind of hoping that they were going to film the reception for the pay-per-view, so that like it was
Yes.
almost be like a post-game show. Maybe you had like Bobby and Gorilla and Piper kind of running down what took place, and then they show clips of like the guests coming into the wedding, and then maybe they just stayed on the air for like another hour, and they would
Right.
they would end the show with when Jake and Undertaker crashed the wedding, and they did the whole angle with the Cobra coming out of the wedding gift. That was because when I watched Superstars the following week, I was like, wait a minute, that didn't happen in summer, and I'm like, oh my
Yeah.
god, and it just blew my mind. So I was kind of hoping that would have made the live broadcast.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point because it kind of not that it ended with a whimper because it was a happy ending, but like I said, it just felt a little flat to me at the time. Like, all right, they got married. All right, what's next? And then
Yep.
it just ended. So I'm like,
Yeah.
ah, that's it was a little interesting that way they went about it. Bret Hart, perfect. Where do you rank that as far as SummerSlam matches?
That's in a top 5 for sure. I
Okay.
honestly, this conversation, I saw this on social media. They were like, "Who is Mr. SummerSlam?" And you can make an argument. In more recent years, it's been Roman, it's been Brock, even Randy Orton to some degree with some of his SummerSlam matches. But early days SummerSlam, Mr. SummerSlam goes to Brett.
Yeah, no,
Shawn
you're right.
Sean's got WrestleMania. Brett's got SummerSlam. I mean, perfect singles match. Bulldog the following year. He did double duty in '93 against Doink and Jerry Lawler. The tag match with Demolition we talked about.
The
The
cage with
cage
Owen.
the cage
Yeah.
with Owen. My favorite SummerSlam match of all time.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
listen, even the '97 match against Taker.
Oh yeah, the story with that. He can't
Yeah.
wrestle in America if he loses, and Sean's the referee. I just watched that recently. Like that. That's just awesome stuff. Brett
Yeah.
definitely. He really carried those SummerSlam shows in the early the early incarnations.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, my number three is following SummerSlam 2000. I went with SummerSlam 2001.
Hmm.
I just felt WWF was just on a roll during this period. You got now they just got WCW, so you have all this plethora of talent on the card. You got, I mean, actually have some dream matchups in a way. You got, Rock versus Booker T. You got RVD versus Jeff Hardy in a lot of matches, which is, by the way,
Yep.
underrated, really great match.
Yes, that
You
doesn't
know,
get talked about enough. I'm glad you
yeah.
said.
Edge, even the opening match, which I think is a very strong match, Edge versus Lance Storm.
Oh,
Jericho Rhino, which didn't work out as well as probably people had hoped. But X Pac and Tajiri having a really nice match for the cruiserweight title. Of course, Austin Angle, which you guys talked about on your latest podcast, which that match I don't think gets the love it deserves.
no.
That match is fantastic. I think
Yep.
the ending for some people maybe soured on it. I thought it was the perfect ending. To be honest with you, I didn't have any problem with the ending. Even though Austin, like you guys said in the podcast, didn't have the greatest heel run, but that match, when I think of the Austin heel run, it's this match that I think of because he's so great in this, and I loved Angle as a face. I especially during this time, 2001, and obviously after 9/11. I thought they
Yeah.
should have went more with him. But to me, that match is one of my top 5 matches. I think it's vastly underrated. So I love this card. I love all the talent on this card. So to me, this is my number 3.
That Austin Angle match, I talked about it. Like I said on my podcast, um, the I think why it doesn't get enough credit is because of Austin's, I would say, failed heel run.
Yeah.
A lot there are some hidden gems, and it's not a testament to this doesn't go against the talent and the ability of Steve Austin. He
No.
tried everything under the sun to make it work. The whole gimmick where he would hug Vince, to try and get some heat, and people looked at that as like, but he did it in a way that was so entertaining you couldn't help but laugh.
Right.
The alliance he had with Kurt Angle before they split up, they were so entertaining that you couldn't boo them. Like you had
No.
to watch them. Even the what chance that started, that was supposed to be a heel thing. That he did it so well that people loved it. Like it wasn't his run wasn't a failure of the heel for lack of trying. I'll say that.
No, and from what Jim Ross said on his podcast, this is what Austin wanted.
Yep.
So, and Ross said, how can we say no to this guy who's given us so many great years that we had to say yes to him, at least give it a shot.
I got a question about that. Do you think his heel run, had WrestleMania been anywhere but in Texas, do you think his heel run could have been a little bit more? Could things have turned out differently?
I don't know if it turned out differently. I think that night probably would turn out differently. I think he would have gotten more boost, obviously, than he did in Houston.
Mm-hmm.
I just like but Dave, I'll be honest with you, it was tough to boo him. Even if that WrestleMania would say it was in LA or whatever, it was just
Yeah,
tough to boo him. It was hard. It was just, and like you said, even all the
you're
stuff
right.
that he was trying to be heelish towards, it was entertaining. Like the stuff with him and Angle with the cowboy hat, or him singing "Kumbaya," and
Yeah,
how can you hate? There's nothing to hate about that. you know.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's a shame that it kind of went that route. And you guys mentioned on the podcast, you know, it's probably number one as far as most failed heel run. And you guys, what other ones could have been like that? And it's hard to come up with one as big as that one. You know, the one I think of as nearly as big, and I think of it as recently, is what they tried to do with Becky Lynch recently. You know, like a year ago when she came
Yeah,
back. You know,
that's
it's
a
just like no matter what she did, it just like people wanted to cheer her,
yeah,
and so they kind of turned her. But
yeah.
not to this level though.
Yeah, the Austin one, and then I think I mentioned it too, but like the few times that they tried to turn Sting heel,
Y'all, yeah.
that was another one where like he had really planted his flag as a hero to so
Mhm.
many fans over the years, and he established himself with the audience as the conquering hero that it you you couldn't. It was hard to boo him no matter what he did. And I also think too what hurt his run was that there was nothing about him that changed.
Right.
Like I think with a good turn, there needs to be something that changes. You know, whether it's the style you work or maybe even your appearance.
Hmm.
Like you can't just keep resting on your laurels or going back to the well to things that you know worked. Like you kind of have to expand. And Austin was doing that with that run.
Yeah.
Uh, but I don't think Sting was in that particular time frame when they turned him heel. I think a couple of times it just didn't.
Yeah.
It just fit with the audience.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, even this, I've been watching a little bit of Impact of 2008, 2009, and he's basically the same guy during in the main event Mafia, and
Yep.
he's kind of torn between like, oh, should I be with these guys or should I? It's like a weird, it's like a weird mix of him and these heels. It was like, it's hard to boo him. It really is. All right, number two, almost there, man. What we got, Dave?
Number two, and this one I'm glad I get to talk about this with you, and I'm sure you might appreciate this. But as I've gotten older with these shows, I had I've gained more of an appreciation for some of them, and this SummerSlam in particular, especially after watching it from start to finish this year, I feel like this card has got a little something for everyone. And I'm talking about the SummerSlam from 1989 at the Meadowlands in New Jersey. That show, as a kid growing up, I mean, I was hyped to for some of the matches on the show. I didn't get a chance to watch it live. Maybe that's another reason why I didn't appreciate it as much when I was younger. But when you go back and you watch this particular SummerSlam, like they had the WWF at that time. 1989 is probably one of the best years in wrestling overall, with the amount of
Mhm.
content between them and Jim Crockett,
Yes.
and with Flair and Steamboat on one channel, and then you had Hogan and Savage on another. You had the best of the best, representing both companies. And to me, that was like one of the most stacked rosters ever. And there were a lot of matches on that show, but it didn't feel like I don't know. It's weird when I watch it. It didn't feel like they crammed in a bunch of shit. Like
Hmm.
everything was just fun about it. Like, all right, Brainbusters Heart Foundation, great tag
Right.
match.
Yeah.
Open up. Then you had I'm not gonna go through the whole card, but things that stood out to me that really like I didn't appreciate back then. The Rockers and Tito Santana against the Rougeos and the Model in like a car crash of a 6-man.
Yes.
Like that is just one of the most fun matches to watch ever. Even Hacksaw Jim Duggan and Demolition against Andre the Giant and the Twin Towers was a fun match. The Ronnie Garvin intro to the Hercules Greg Valentine match, when he intros Greg Valentine and says that he has 2 left feet. It was just it's fun stuff. Warrior and Rude with Roddy Piper at the end,
Yeah.
and the title. God, there's so much stuff. Dusty and Honky Tonk Man was a fun match.
Yeah. His first pay-per-view. Yep.
The main event, Hogan and Beefcake, Savage and Zeus, stemmed from the movie, the No Holds Barred movie. I mean, it's that show's got a little bit of something for everyone. It's got sports entertainment, it's got wrestling, it's got the Gaga, it's got a little bit of everything all rolled up into one. And that Meadowlands crowd, every match they were on fire for.
They are.
Like
Yeah.
finish, and like I was tired watching. I was like, how can they still be into Mr. Perfect and the Red Rooster right now? But they were still into it. It was great.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. And it's funny to me. The MVP of that whole SummerSlam is Savage because obviously Zeus can't do much, and Savage is bumping like
Oh yeah,
crazy in this match. I mean, just doing all kinds of stuff with Hogan and Beefcake. He was great. I love the way he goes in the ring and whispers in Zeus's ear.
yeah,
You're right. That card is really good, really underrated. I love the way they start that SummerSlam with Brainbusters versus the Heart Foundation, which is a banger of a match. And to me, as a pro wrestling fan, that was kind of like a dream match for me. It was like like, oh my god, it's like the NWA versus the WWF at the time.
yeah. Eh,
Again, we mentioned again Warrior Rude. The guys with great chemistry.
Yeah,
And of course, the great ending with Piper showing his derriere to
yeah,
Ravishing Rick Rude.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a fun WrestleMania. And what I like about that WrestleMania too is what makes it different. And people don't like it as so much, but I like it because it's different. Is Tony Schiavone on the play-by-play?
Yeah.
Which made it a little bit. It wasn't the usual Gorilla, which I love, Gorilla and Jesse, but it made it different.
Yeah, it just fit. It just fit well. His commentary on that show was pretty good. Him and Jesse together,
Yeah,
it just fit. I don't know what it was, but for whatever reason, it just the way he called the action, and I don't know if it was the acoustics with the audience that night in the building, but everything it just worked. Like I said, I watched that recently, and I was like, damn, that was a fun show. That was
yeah,
a fun half
that is a
hours.
mention. Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, like these. Your top five so far has been all kind of like 80s, 90s, and mine have kind of been like in the 2000s.
Yeah,
Which is interesting, and I'm gonna continue that. But going actually get a little bit more recent. My number two is SummerSlam 2013. Um, I love this SummerSlam. I love the ending of the SummerSlam. It's
yes,
it's Cena and Daniel Bryan, which people have wanted for so long. I remember being in Brooklyn. Uh, Actually, I went with Dave LaGreca. We went to this Raw at Barclays, and they kind of set up the Bryan Cena matchup that night, and the crowd went ape shit. Like,
yeah,
like they couldn't believe, oh my god, Bryan's finally getting his shot.
yep,
This is before the Yes Move. I mean, the Yes Move was still going, but it was before it got really going. This is
yeah.
before WrestleMania 30. It's before we gotta get Dana Bryan in the main event. This is before all that. I just love the match is great. By the way,
Yep.
when he pins him, I would like it's a little bit of a shock. You didn't think
Yep.
Cena would get pinned cleanly, and he does. And he's getting this great moment, and all of a sudden, Randy Orton's music comes out, and Triple H, of course, does the whole kick in the gut pedigree, and here we go. He's cashing the Money in the Bank, and leaves the crowd like stunned. So I love the ending to that. It set up the whole Triple H and Stephanie against Daniel Bryan. It set up Randy Orton. It sets up Seth Rollins coming in the future. I love that one. There's also a tremendous, tremendous match between Lesnar and Punk.
Yes.
Um, I love that match. Punk, it's no disqualification. Punk is bumping all over the place. It's a 25-minute match, which you don't get from Lesnar, much
That's
from Lesnar these days.
yeah.
So that match is really great. There's a really good underrated Alberto Del Rio Christian match.
I was just
Uh,
gonna say sleeper right there. I like
yeah,
that.
excellent match there. I mean, listen, there's a couple of not great matches. You had the Bray Wyatt, which was his debut in the pay-per-view.
Yep.
Didn't come off great with Kane, but still Bray Wyatt's debut. But like I said, to me, that those two matches, especially the Lesnar Punk and the Bryan, and just that ending, to me, that's why it's my number two. I love it.
That is a great show. I do like that show. The match, almost the finish with Brian when he won. Excuse me, like you said, you were shocked. It almost felt very anticlimactic because he pinned him so clean. Like
Yes,
there was no screwy finish. It was
it
almost
kind of
like
came out of nowhere. It did.
yeah, it was almost like wait a minute, oh it's over and he won. Like wow, you
And
know.
he did it with the knee, the running knee, which at that time wasn't his finishing maneuver. It was the label lock. So
Yeah.
when he did that, you're right, it came out of nowhere. That's a good
I
point.
think also too made it so anticlimactic is the fact that, and it's still, unfortunately a thing these days, is that everybody kicks out everybody's finishers.
Yeah,
Oh, I think people expected Cena to kick out because of the way that they had booked him for so long that they
sure,
figured it's not going to win.
right. But like I said, I just love the turn. You're so happy. Like I said, I was a big Dana Bryan supporter, so I was like, oh my god, finally the guy gets and all of a sudden Ort's music plays, and you're like, oh shit.
Yeah.
It's like you knew what was coming. And it's
Yeah.
like, how are they gonna do this when Triple H turned on? I'm like, oh my god, really? You
Yeah.
can't give this guy a run with the title, and of course, it led to greater things. So, all right,
Yeah.
we're here, Dave. Number one, what we got?
Number one. I'm taking a page out of your book, and I'm going into the early 2000s, and this is my number one favorite SummerSlam card. I think this is the greatest SummerSlam of all time, from 2002.
Okay,
SummerSlam. Rock and Brock main evented. The only reason why I watched this show was because Shawn Michaels was coming back after 4 years, and I was all about it. I was, for 4 years I was hanging by a thread, hoping that he was going to make some kind of a comeback, or at
right.
least a farewell match. I was like, he can't go out the way he did with Mike Tyson and Steve Austin at WrestleMania that year. Even though it was great, I'm all about like these guys getting like a proper send off, or a
Yes.
proper. And I thought, like, all right, if he's got one more and it's with his best friend, uh, and that's it, then I've died a happy wrestling fan. That's and I mean, obviously he hung on for another 8 years or so, and created some great moments during the time frame. But the whole card, like, once again, it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier in 2005. That was the first 2002 was the first year of the brand split. And
Right.
so they had done the draft, and I wasn't really a big fan of some of the moves that they did and the way they did the draft. Like, I felt like there could have been a little more thought put into it. But then when they got the GMs, when they put Steph on SmackDown and Eric Bischoff on Raw, and they kind of reshuffled things, I was like, okay. I was like, and that was what, 2 months after Austin walked out on the company.
Yes, that's right.
So it was another situation where Austin wasn't around, and they were still cooking with some great matches and great content. Ray and Kurt Angle, hell of an opening match, probably one of the best opening matches in SummerSlam history. Edge and Eddie Guerrero was a great match. Chris Benoit and RVD for the Intercontinental title was a great match. The Un-Americans against Booker T and Goldust, that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Undertaker Test was a lot of fun too, and then you had Shawn and Hunter, and then Rock and Brock. I mean, overall, like, that's, to me, that's the greatest SummerSlam of all time.
That's a great number one, Dave, and so great that it's also my number one.
There you
So yeah, I mean, to me, I think it's the only one that you can go with. To me, it's the ultimate SummerSlam to me. You're so right. They had it at Nassau Coliseum, but it felt like a New York City crowd. The crowd was into everything. I mean, look at all the Hall of Famers on this card. I mean, like you said, Edge and Benoit, and Mysterio and Angle, Flair and Jericho.
Oh, I
You
forgot
know,
about.
yeah. I mean, another one. I mean, the only one that really wasn't, was okay was Undertaker Test, but still, you had Undertaker there, so who
Yeah.
cares? But those last two matches, you're so right, are so great. I'll be honest with you, I wasn't the biggest Shawn Michaels fan, not with his wrestling matches, just him in general. I wasn't a fan of the character itself, but after that night, I became a fan.
Yeah.
I actually started rooting for him after this, and the way JR calls that match
Oh,
so dramatically, and I love even the ending where Triple H after the match hits him with the sledgehammer. You're thinking, all right, he's gone for even longer now. Who
yeah.
knows how long he's going to be out for? Of course, he comes back in Survivor Series, but nobody knew that. Nobody knew. Listen, we all thought this was going to be one match only, and that's going to be it. And I mean, he was better than ever, Dave. Like,
Yeah,
I mean, it was
exactly.
unbelievable some of the stuff he was doing and the selling that he was doing with his back. When Triple H was hitting him with that sledgehammer or with that chair, and his look on his face, it looked like he was in pain.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny you brought up JR with the calls, because there's one call, and you can give WWE a lot of flack for being sports entertainment, but they definitely know how to produce drama. There was a point at the end when they had the referees and the medics came out to tend to Shawn. You see Hunter kind of walking towards the back, and he's covered in blood, and he's got this like smirk on his face. And JR, in his Southern drawl, and this is one of my favorite calls of all time, he goes, "Do you have no heart? Do you have no soul? You son of a bitch!" And the timing of it with Hunter's face, the smirk, I was like, I mean, JR could call. I mean, JR, in my opinion, he's lost a step in the last few years, which
Yeah,
comes with age, of course. No disrespect to him, but JR is one of the top, in my opinion, announcers in all of sports itself. I
agreed.
mean, I put him up there with Al Michaels and with the Howard Cosell's of the world and Bob Costas and all kinds of greats that have called major sporting events. JR is the JR I think is he's the greatest of all time when it comes to commentary in the genre that is pro wrestling.
Yeah,
And he made that call, and it was just I was like, wow, like
yeah,
I was just blown away. But
yeah.
just
I
the
mean,
match,
the
the end,
match is dramatic enough, but he took it to another level with his commentary. And it's funny, Lawler is supposed to be this heel, color guy, and he's actually sympathizing with Shawn
yeah,
during the match as well, which I thought
yeah,
was interesting. And you're right, listen, Brock Rock. God, I wish they had another match after this. This match was
oh
great.
man,
I love the crowd reaction. It was all for Brock. I'm not sure if they were sick of The Rock or if they just liked Brock so much, but whatever it was, and I love The Rock even played along with it. Maybe it was that Rock was kind of getting stale a little bit because he was getting booed against Hogan and now against Lesnar, and it was perfect that he left after this and kind of reinvented himself and turned into like a little bit of a heel in '03. But I think people were kind of into Brock at the time. I thought for someone that green to have that kind of match with The Rock, I also love the workout videos before the leading up to the match. Rock running up the Miami during the Miami Florida Hurricanes football field up the steps,
yeah,
and Lesnar doing these crazy lifting
running down the road with like a telephone pole on his,
yes, yes,
you
right.
like
Yeah,
gee,
yeah. So I love the whole lead up to that match. I love the way it ended. And it kind of brought in a new era. It was like, now this is the Brock era. And listen, to me, you said it right, Dave. It's the best SummerSlam of all time. I'll argue that it might be the greatest card of all time.
like overall wrestling card.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's this and WrestleMania 17. I don't know what else is out there that competes with this one. I mean, besides those two.
That's a good point. I'll have to go back and really dig deep, see if there's anything that can hang up there with that. Those vignettes, though, I must say, they had a very like HBO real sports kind of feel to it before
Yes.
that was a thing. Um, and I do agree with you. I think that there was a combination of like the audience was kind of the kind of sick of The Rock, and they saw Brock as this new thing. And I think like I don't know if you remember in the match, but they were chanting Goldberg at one point.
Oh,
Uh,
really? Okay, I don't remember that.
there
Okay.
was chants during the match, and I think because they saw Brock, he was this big muscular guy. He wore all black. It was kind of people looked at that like, oh, like that's their version of Goldberg. But Brock obviously eclipsed Goldberg with his skill and his ability. I think also too, if you really go back and you watch it, that New York crowds have always been very vocal, as you
Yeah.
know. You did plenty of shows, in New York,
Mm.
being from there, but that was like the first time that I can remember where it had like a very like smart mark internet kind of
Mm.
vibe with that match, and that was like one of the early instances where the crowd had kind of taken over a match.
Yeah. That's a good
Um,
point. Yeah.
way that like it didn't. I wouldn't say it came across bad, but it's not what they intended. Like you
No,
saw Rock at WrestleMania earlier that year. Maybe it's a coincidence that Rock had happened to be in both those matches, but yeah, it was. It to me, it reminded me of like this was like the start of like one of the early iterations of where like those internet wrestling fans just had to express themselves in a way that kind of hijacked the show.
yeah, it's funny you say that because like listen, they turned Brock face like a couple months later, at
Yeah,
Survivor Series, with the Big Show, because he was getting cheers even like during his Hell in a Cell match with Taker. So there,
yeah,
there was definitely a swell of like people like really like getting into this guy. I'm not sure. Maybe they did it too quick. Who knows? Another conversation for another day. But listen,
yeah.
Lesnar was the beast back then, and I absolutely love that match. Dave, thanks so much for joining us. What's your
I,
top five SummerSlam cards? Please comment about down below, like, subscribe. Dave, what else you got going on, man? We got things coming up.
yeah, they're kicking out of two. I got some ideas. I think the month of September, I'm going to do like a like the worst kind of like a the worst matches or the worst. I'm going to do like a real like shitty theme for this month. You know, like the worst pay-per-views or the worst debuts, stuff like that. So I'm just kind of
Love it.
working on that. So you can find my podcast on Podbean by searching Retromania with a W. We're part of the Retromania Pro Wrestling Podcast Network. So there's other podcasts on there that you can listen to, like Marking Out the Days. You can listen to Cool Truth with AC, where they discuss some AEW and some of the current stuff. And then my show, Kicking Out at 2, you can find those in the archives or on any podcast platform available. Search Retromania or Kicking Out at 2. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter at Kicking Out 2. So, I haven't been keeping up with the social media as much, but that's pretty much what I got going on. And Mike, thank you again. This has been a pleasure.
Oh, it was a lot of fun. And again, if you're a retro wrestling fan like I am, you got to check out his podcast. It's great. Hope to have you back on, Dave. Thanks so much for doing this, man.
I'll definitely get you on at some point soon too. So we'll make it happen.
Oh, you got it, man. Take care. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike.